82. Yep. Okay, thank you, councillors and staff. We'll get back underway. So next up, we have the submission to the territorial and neighbouring councils LTPs, which is the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and the Thames Coromandel District Council. So leading this is Jane Appley. Thank you, Jane.
Morning, councillors. As you'll be aware, councils across New Zealand.
Can you drag your mic
right over?
Right. Yeah, thank you.
My first time. Councils across New Zealand are currently consulting on their long-term plans, and this report presents two of our submissions, one to Bay of Plenty Regional Council and one to Thames Coromandel District Council. In crafting these submissions, staff have focused on strategic alignment and providing support to our neighbouring and territorial councils. Happy to take the submissions as read and take any questions or comments.
So any questions for either of the two LTP submissions? No, for your first time, you get away scot-free. So the remit we have in front of us is that the report be received and that strategy and policy. So sorry, we do have some comments. Thank you.
Just a question with regards to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council submission. Just want to and feel free to point me into the place if you've already commented on this in the paper. But just wanting to explore where are opportunities to express the that interregional connectivity piece, whether that is through our regional transport committee and our RLTPs, making sure that there's alignment where that can be achieved. Just wanting to see if there are opportunities for us to indicate to our regional neighbors that the more joined up our processes are, our planning is, then the more opportunity we have to have constructive conversations with central government around particularly infrastructure investment. Just wondering if there's opportunity to talk about that in this.
Thank you. The focus of the submission to Bay of Plenty is around that sort of interregional connections, but we haven't included specifically transport connections. I'm happy to go back to staff and have some comment included there.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to frame something up to put in there. I am aware that the Regional Transport Committee does, through the Triennium, like to have a joint meeting both with Taranaki and with Bay of Plenty, so we could reiterate that. But I think there is a real opportunity there around the spatial planning, around the interregional deals, the conversation around the UNISA, the Upper North Island Strategic Alliance. So how about we frame up a paragraph that gets the message across, because it's very rare that we have another opportunity to do so. Yep.
Thank you, Pamela. Ben.
Oh, just to say, page 87, item 5 covers that initially, but it doesn't take it further, as Pam suggested. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's also a missing out of Bay of Plenty in that first paragraph too, as well. Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to echo what Chair Pamela said, and thank you, Tracy, for writing something up. Probably just highlight the future-proof and smart growth synergies as well. Yeah, thank you.
I think, Mr. Chair, there are a bunch of activities. I mean, the work that ICM's doing with the wallaby control and biosecurity matters, both terrestrial and coastal marine. So I'll just expand it out so we've got that hook.
So with regards to the wording of this motion, then we want to include delegation to yourself and myself to come back or not to come back, but to.
We can, but I think we can just insert a paragraph that is reflective of the general tenor of conversation.
Yep. So that would be inserted here. Just to make, just making sure that it is captured.
Yep, noting that further strengthening of the interregional relationships and opportunities. Are included in the submission. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, councillors. Happy with that wording? All good. If I could have a mover, thank you, councillor Story. Seconded, councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Thank you very much, team. Yes, so the next one up is page 88, and that's our Waikato Regional Aquaculture Strategy.
So councillors, just to preface this whilst David and Alejandro are coming up to the table. So the Regional Aquaculture Strategy has progressed over a number of years. The last time you saw it would have been kind of this time last year when we introduced it through the Regional Coastal Plan workshops and gave you an update of where it's at. Alejandro and David have been working away with iwi, with industry, with other stakeholders on the strategy over the last little while, and we will continue to do so. So they will give you an update of where it's at. We are looking to get the strategy endorsed today from the committee. I've also asked David just to give an overview for the committee. We've had a couple of matters in the last wee while come through from government direction, the signalling of the extension of timelines for aquaculture consents, and then also the fast track approvals bill, which we'll be having a workshop on next week, with the bill going to the submissions subcommittee the following week. Just what the impacts that may have on the strategy. And David and Alejandro have a short presentation to take you through to refresh you on the high points of this.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, David.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Good to see everyone again. So I do have a short presentation. Now, this last came back to this committee back on the 8th of June 2022, so it was a little while ago. At that stage, what we had was a draft strategy that then went out for further feedback. And during that period, we also set up the Waikato Regional Aquaculture Forum group. So that's a group with all the partner stakeholders sitting around the table, and that's what Alejandro is responsible for. So that group was established last year, has a terms of reference, which is set out in attachment 3. That terms of reference was approved in December. And that's the group or the avenue in which we want to progress the implementation of the strategy and basically make a difference to the Waikato region and make a difference for aquaculture. So I'll just step you through the presentation. Some of this may be a little bit familiar, but we'll just run through the first slide, please. So the strategy itself has been prepared with input from stakeholders and partners, and those stakeholders and partners are listed in the agenda report and in the 2 strategy documents in front of you. What you have in front of you now is a summarised version of what you received 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, it was a much more expansive strategy. It was 32 pages. And prior to that, I think the draft was about 60. So what some of the key messages we heard is it's not so much about the content of the strategy, it's about the delivery of it and how it's implemented and identifying what the priorities are. And so we've had assistance from the industry, from Aquaculture New Zealand and Coromandel Marine Farmers Association, and also from the likes of Tiwaka and the local authorities, as well as tangata whenua. Next slide. So growing together, Whakatupu ngātahi is our, I guess, byline for this. So growing together. The vision is that the Waikato has a world-class, sustainable and innovative aquaculture industry. That's what we want to see. In order to achieve that, we want to double the value of export growth over the next 20 years. So currently that's around about 91.6 million. We want to double that to 180 million. Originally, we had a timeline of 10 years. The industry felt that was perhaps a little bit over ambitious, and so we've extended that to 20 years. Next slide. So the strategy is a blueprint. It has come directly from the operative Waikato Regional Policy Statement. So there is a method that requires the strategy to be prepared, but it has been prepared as a collaborative strategy on behalf of all of the key stakeholder partners. So this isn't intended as only a Waikato Regional Council strategy. And for that reason, you'll see that the look and feel of it is very much a non-Waikato Regional Council strategy document. The logo isn't anywhere on it. And it's very much around having something pithy and concise and that can be distributed and endorsed. Next slide. So there is some national direction that already exists as well as local direction. So the New Zealand government at the time, the Labour government, introduced the aquaculture strategy, which is a national aquaculture strategy, and the regional strategy aligns with the objectives and the goals of that national strategy. Each year they produce an implementation plan, and that's the intent through the Waikato Regional Aquaculture Group, is that a work program or an annual plan is produced which builds on the implementation plan that's attached to the agenda report. So that implementation plan sets out the broad actions and broad priorities, but the detail will come through the action plan through the annual work program of the forum group. That'll be where they identify who's responsible and how. We also have a number of local and regional economic development opportunities. So you're aware of the Sugarloaf Wharf redevelopment, the Kopu Marine Precinct. That's all assisting with growth of the aquaculture industry. Next slide, please. So who's involved? As I mentioned, we have sought and had involvement, particularly from Pariharaki, but also recent conversations with Waikato Tainui and Te Nihinui Nui. The industry is involved, central government through MPI and the aquaculture unit, and Te Aho Kaimoana, who are the government agency responsible for managing the aquaculture settlements as a result of the assets or monetary value that's provided back to iwi. And we have examples of that already in the region. The local council, so all four of the coastal councils are involved, 5 of the coastal councils. And then, as I mentioned, Te Waka, as well as the likes of TCDC's Economic Development Unit. Next slide. So in our region, and this is on page 3 of the strategy itself, which is only a 6-page document, we've just highlighted some key kind of stats there and facts and figures. The numbers in terms of the percentage of the Waikato region for aquaculture has dropped. So 3 years ago, oysters was 24% and mussels was 36%. So you see we've gone from 36% to 26%. Partly that's because other regions have seen new farms established, particularly Auckland, but also because of the issues around spat viability and productivity of farms, particularly in the Hauraki Gulf at the Thames. So that's a number that we're concerned about. We want to increase that. And that's very much a focus of the Waikato Aquaculture Group, is how do we increase productivity, but how do we also effectively better manage what's currently there. So more productivity off the current farms, as well as looking for new opportunities. The next slide. For interest, this is our development timeline. So it has been a little bit of a journey. We have workshopped previously the draft strategy with the last council, and we did have a very successful forum that was held back in August 2022 with about 50 to 60 stakeholders attending in Thames. So that had the marine farming industry, the likes of the National Moana New Zealand, Samfords, etc. in attendance, as well as obviously government and local government agencies, iwi and hapu. So we're now at the stage we want to adopt the strategy and also get your support for the implementation plan, which would then be approved and finalised through the aquaculture group. Next slide. So just touching briefly on the draft strategy, as I mentioned, that was a much more larger document. It had 36 actions in it. Next slide. Those 36 actions, you probably won't be able to see that very clearly, but we had identified who the lead agency was, what the priority was, the timeframes and how you might measure the success of that action. So each of those was across 6 outcome areas. We now have 4 outcome areas. So of those 4 outcome areas, those actions, as I mentioned, will be delivered through the annual work program. And final slide. So just touching on those outcome areas, I won't read them out, but those have the universal support from the stakeholder partners. As I say, this has been round the traps a few times. It's a little bit like reinventing the wheel. But I think very much those priorities around sustainable, resilient and prosperous, there's definite buy-in to looking at how we can all make that outcome and the goal and vision of the strategy be achieved. And just last slide. So just in terms of the next steps, the idea is to share the strategy with our stakeholder partners, subject to today, of course. There'll be a media release report being made available, the strategy made available on the webpage. And then the next aquaculture group meeting is being held likely end of April. At that stage, we want to approve the implementation plan and get underway with the actual delivery of that implementation plan through the work program. Then it'll be a case of the aquaculture group reporting back, and they'll report back through to this committee on progress against those actions and how we've delivered. Just in terms of the 2 matters that have been raised by the director, you may or may not be aware, but the government has announced its intention to extend all existing marine farm permits by 25 years. So that's an announcement that Minister Jones made. It's expected there'll be a bill to give effect to that later this year, and a call for submissions will be made. Waikato Regional Council did provide feedback. It was a very short period. It basically got announced on a Tuesday. There was a meeting on the Thursday, and feedback closed on the Monday. So this all happened about 2 or 3 weeks ago. From what we understand is a lot of those consents that have come up for their 35-year term renewal have recently been approved. So they have a 35-year renewal. There's one consent that has a 25-year renewal. So if we add 25 years onto those 35-year terms, we are looking at 60-year consents. Many of those consents that have come up for renewal, they are under the old licensing regime that existed pre-RMA. So they have very limited consent monitoring conditions. In fact, some have no monitoring conditions. And one of the concerns is that if that 25-year term goes ahead with that extension, there should be an ability to address matters where locations may not necessarily be desirable. So with marine warming, the ability to relocate farms, but also the ability to monitor the effect of those farms, which is something that currently the team undertake. In terms of the fast tracking, it's unsure whether any future marine farms, for example, fish farms, would fall under the fast tracking legislation. That list of what may or may not sit under that legislation hasn't been determined, but it would in future provide an excellent pathway for the likes of the Sugarloaf Wharf redevelopment, which now has consent. So I'm not sure if Alejandro wants to add anything to that, having been responsible for those submissions.
Thank you, David. To you, Mr. Chair, it's just one comment on the potential effects of fast track. We currently operate under the Fast Track Consenting Act that was issued under COVID rules. The current one, or the one that is being proposed, is currently subject to submissions. However, just to note that the main difference is who makes the decision In terms of the projects that could be referred to the panel for decision, the procedure remains largely the same. It's essentially whatever is not in the Schedule 1 of the projects that have been identified in the Act or the bill at this moment, then we'll have a referral process to go through. Kopu Marine Precinct was one such under the previous regime that actually went through. So as David mentioned, there's always challenges and opportunities as to what it means for the industry. However, the submission that we're currently preparing actually raises some of the issues that need to be addressed in terms of customary titles and the management of the area based on what we have in the proposed regional coastal plan. So there's always many parts that are moving and interlinked with each other, but we're trying to make sure that the submissions are consistent across the board and ensure that the regional coastal plan, the proposed regional coastal plan is largely unaffected by whatever the government proposes, as much as we can advocate for it. Similarly, to ensure that if it does go ahead, then we always have another option that the government can consider to alleviate some of those potential impacts.
Thank you, Alejandro. Right, I'll come to councillors for questions. Ben?
Yeah, if we could go back to the slide that has the map on it.
That one?
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out to you that on the right-hand side on the east coast, it's not a good idea to have the arrows pointing to suggest there's 1,572 hectares of consented for shellfish there, given that's not in the coastal plan. My recommendation would be that you move those off into the green area and remove the arrow. So the facts are still there, but they're not identified as an East Coast issue. Understand what I'm saying?
Actually, if I can just get mics off, we do have a speaking order just so I can get David a mic back. Thank you.
All right, thank you, councillor. Yes, we were aware of that. I guess part of it was trying to present the information in a graphical way. So it's identifying that the whole of the coastal marine area across the Waikato region has that number of hectares and number of farms, but fully recognise that there's a very limited number of farms on the eastern Coromandel.
So I'm not suggesting anything other than removing the arrow part and just moving it across to the green. So you leave the facts.
Just clarification. Yeah.
The other point is,
Yes, no, we can do that. Thank you.
Attachment 2, the implementation plan, isn't in our documents from what I can see. We've got the strategy, then we've got attachment 2, implementation plan, but it's not here. Then we go to the aquaculture group terms of reference. So we're being asked to make a decision based on something we don't have.
You leave that on, David.
Yeah, I was going to say, so my version of the agenda at page 98 and 99 has the implementation plan. Does look very similar, being the last 2 pages, and doesn't have attachment 2 at the top. Yes, we deliberately made it 2 separate documents because we were asking you as the committee to adopt the strategy, but for the implementation plan to be approved through the Aquaculture Forum Group to give them that level of ownership and responsibility for the actions and for the work program.
Thanks. So leave that mic on, David. That way you won't lose it, because I'm pretty sure we've got a few more questions. Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the documents. It was really easy to read. Thank you. Just had a question around outcome 4 of your implementation plan. Sorry. Point 4 on outcome 4 talks about supply chain security risks, especially State Highway 25. Just given that the current government's GPS has removed coastal shipping, and we know that State Highway 25 is precarious at times, just interested in your advisory group's thoughts around how they might, secure that route and the supply chain infrastructure moving forward.
I think that's a great question. It hasn't been discussed in any great detail. Part of the discussion is blue water transport options, which potentially could then result in the product being moved up to Auckland and processed in Auckland, which isn't a desirable outcome. There's already product from the Coromandel that comes down to the south, but it is something that the farmers have a great concern about in terms of being able to get the product, for example, to Auckland Airport to then freight it out. About 80% of the product produced from the Coromandel is exported overseas. So I don't have an answer to it, but it's absolutely a fundamental matter.
Yep. Just come to Tracy's got an additional
Yeah.
comment.
Through the chair, I think that's a great question that will actually show us the mettle of the group and whether it's delivering, because the whole purpose of the implementation plan isn't WRC after everything, but the group collectively. So in terms of understanding our joint ability to lobby the government and say, look, you know, you've moved your lens away from that onto something else, using all the tools that we have across the working group and using Te Waka, using iwi, using our industry, because that's something that the industry did identify, us going to government with a joined up voice on the basis of a strategy that aligns with the previous strategy, pretty much aligns with the existing government's direction for aquaculture, is pretty powerful. So that is one thing. David's writing furiously down there, but that is something we can definitely take to the working group and go, okay, let's put this into action. This is what you wanted. Let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tracy. Mikhail.
Yeah, my question is, how concerned should we be with this fast tracking, considering that, from my understanding, they can override environmental effects and the RMA? How concerned are we with, these projects?
I'll take this one. So we've been coordinating a submission, reviewed that submission. So Lizette, I think Lizette was over there before, she might have disappeared. Lizette's team's been coordinating it as we do with all submissions, reviewed the draft of that yesterday. There are some issues that we need to look at, I think, and there are other good parts in the legislation. So that submission we have penciled in for a workshop next week, so all of council can understand what the issues are that we're. It goes to our submission subcommittee. Again, just because of the timing, we weren't able to get it on this agenda or an agenda for council. So there are very real concerns. We've highlighted those. We've tried to be balanced and constructive in our response, and council will likely see that by the end of the week in advance of the workshop.
Thanks, Tracy, because there's big concerns from iwi as well.
There are.
Big concerns.
If I can just, sorry,
No,
Mr.
you
Chair. I know some iwi and some others have asked us to lodge a joint submission. We won't be lodging a joint submission for the reasons that I gave the previous council, and I'll give the same council. We need to advocate for our roles and responsibilities and be heard for our functions and speak on behalf of our ratepayers who invest with us. We start to get into tricky spaces if we align ourselves with iwi, with any other sector groups or any other interest groups. So that will be my advice always if we are asked to lodge joint submissions. The only space that we will wander into is a future-proof joint submission. What we do, councillors, is we do provide our draft submissions to our iwi partners and all our territorial authorities and anyone else who would like to have a look at it, noting that it is draft and our final submission is that's signed by council.
Thank you, Tracy. Kia ora.
Kia ora kōrua. I don't know why, but you seem to have lost 10 hectares in the consented for shellfish between that slide and the one we got in our pack. But that's not my question. I just thought you might like to know that.
It was a last minute change.
Well, it's a pity you did go from 26% to 27 as a mistake. We would have been really happy. But anyway, my question is, what is our view on the consent that has been put up about extending the consent of these agriculture farming and stuff? Because I've been online on the whole iwi, no, it wasn't iwi, on the whole of New Zealand's MPI, online committee meetings, and there are so many people against that long-term consenting because they want to take it up to 25 years for anything that's going out in April, in this year for a year, and plus anybody who wants it now is going to go for something like 40 odd years, 30 years, and there's so many people around the country who's against that. So I wondered, where do we stand on that extra length of time being added to the consent?
I know Alejandro did touch slightly on some of our concerns, but she wants to expand on them.
Again, we were asked for staff pre-comment, as Alejandro said. As David said, I think we had a day and a half to rustle something up. We provided that comment. I think I've made sure that our chair had our chair and our chair of the committee had copies of those comments. They are just staff comments as the government has they term it pre-engagement with interested stakeholders, which is 18 hours to provide some comment. What we do have though is we have, and I think the Chief Executive will be sharing it with councillors, an indicative 3-year work program from Ministry for the Environment. What that does enable is it enables us to have some conversations in advance of these things landing. What we do know is the RMA Amendment Bill, which includes the formal application to extend consent duration for aquaculture activities. We're likely to receive that bill by June, as Alejandro said, that the government will look to have that enacted by December. So happy to share with councillors the comments that staff provided very quickly, a quick turnaround. We will have the opportunity to have a formal position on that. Again, we're trying to be positively constructive, but there are some issues there with extending those periods of time, particularly with such a dynamic environment. But we also appreciate the certainty of investment that the government is trying to provide those operators. But there are some real concerns. We will circulate the staff comments. They are staff comments, and we'll make sure, and we're aware, hopefully we know that by the end of June, will either come to this committee or submission subcommittee. And we are aware of dissatisfaction. We're also aware of those who support it, as any bill we always encounter.
Thank you for that, Tracy. Yeah, Chris.
Thank you, Chair Warren. Look, and Tracy's really just touched on a bit of this, but I do support this 25-year renewal. You're talking about a lot of money being invested in these farms, not just the farms themselves, but the harvesting assets, processing facilities. And I personally believe that any consent should be for the life of the asset. The farm maintenance is done on a regular basis, we probably all are aware, but the big cost is in the infrastructure, which is putting the farms down, putting building the boats, which are expensive, the harvesting machinery, plus the facility to process it. In terms of forward strategy, I think it's aspirational to have a goal of doubling the revenue generation from the area. I think that's brilliant. But what I'd like to think is that rather than having a proliferation of farms covered, because there's a big percentage of the waterway already covered, I'm not sure whether we've specified what's acceptable to the community in terms of how much that water should be occupied by farms. But I'd like to think that we'd be looking at value add. In other words, if mussels are not producing the revenue generation that's expected of, for the investment involved, then, I notice seaweed, live fish farms. I'd like to think that we'd be retiring some of the mussel farms and moving to those other higher value activities rather than just adding a proliferation of new activities to take up even more of the waterways. So, yeah. So that's really where I sit on the thing. But I am in favour of the consenting period should align with the investment period for the most expensive assets in the business undertaking.
Thank you. Sorry if I can just respond, Chair, because I think you've excellently summarised what I guess some of the priorities are in terms of mussels may or may not be the future, and it is very much around looking at seaweeds, looking at fish farming. And a lot of the marine farming industry is looking at the current Pariharaki fish farm that's been consented. It's gone through MPI approval, so that's the 300 hectares up on the map. As a possible replication elsewhere, and we have to ensure that it's in the appropriate places. So some of the work's been done already through the coastal plan, looking at what areas may be appropriate. Through the National Environmental Standards for Marine Aquaculture, that also requires us to identify areas that may be inappropriate for aquaculture. And so we've done that again through the coastal plan, and current consent renewals that are being processed by council giving consideration to those areas. The other point, just in response to Councillor Hodge, is just in the last week we've been working with Ngāti Whananga up in the Coromandel around their input to 3 oyster farm renewals from Moana, New Zealand, who are actually an entity owned by iwi. So they have concerns about the location of those farms and the monitoring conditions, and have done a cultural impact assessment. And so we're continuing to support them through the process, and they're also keen to be involved in the coastal plan process. And we did certainly receive a large number of submissions on aquaculture to the coastal plan. But yeah, just to reiterate, the strategy is about economic development. It's about economic growth, but bearing in mind the need to be cognizant of environmental and cultural values as well. But it is very much around how can we grow aquaculture in a way that ensures that we're resilient, prosperous, as well as preserving environmental and cultural values.
Thank you, David. Yes, that was one of my points I was going to bring up too, Chris, is that value add and also the local market, because it seems to be primarily focused on exports. So it'd be good to see where they can expand locally. A couple of other things just for me too. How is Te Waka having further involvement in this strategy group going forwards?
Yes, so Te Waka, their general manager, is a member of the group. And has provided, I guess, some of those valuable connections in terms of workforce strategies and some of the other, requirements in terms of route security and supply. So very much a partnership and collaboration, having the right people around the table. So Rosie Sprague, who's the general manager at Te Waka, is certainly more than capable.
No, thanks for that. Obviously, Te Waka's in our long-term plan, etc. So also, how did we land with the cost of the independent chair? We seem to be, I know it's not the Waikato Regional Council strategy, it's this forum group, and we seem to be covering a lot of the costs.
I can respond to that, Mr. Chair. We previously had an aquaculture forum, and the aquaculture forum was a meeting of many people and their friends and their people that they wanted to bring along. And one of the key criticisms from industry was it's just turned into a really big meeting where a lot of people come along, we have a lot of conversation and no action happens. So the industry, and we took that on board. So we said, well, let's have a streamlined process. We had a conversation, and an independent chair we appointed as somebody who, our independent chair is Rebecca Clarkson. Rebecca has a long history with the aquaculture industry and also with WRC and helping us facilitate our way through some issues. So we do cover the cost. It's a nominal cost. It's within existing budgets. I cannot remember the fee off the top of my head, but it is definitely less than $15,000 or $20,000 a year. It is, I think, a small amount of investment that we make in order to get the confidence from our industry and to be able to have someone who knows the industry and is able to have a conversation with government as well. A question we could ask as well is this a role that Te Waka could do? I think it does take specialist knowledge and specialist skill of the aquaculture industry as opposed to generic economic development. Rebecca has facilitated, I think, a couple of meetings for us. These meetings are not every month, But for me, it was a good investment, well within my delegated authority, a good investment in order to get the industry working alongside us to hopefully make some changes in this space.
Thank you for that, Tracy. And just before I come to you, Chris, just indication to the staff that both myself and Councillor Dunbar-Smith would be interested in attending some of these forum meetings. We don't want to stick our oar in, but it's just being in the room and hearing what's going on in that space. Just so a note, if we could be perhaps advised of when those meetings are coming up, and if it works, that would be fantastic. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Warren. As a matter of principle, I'm against us regional council funding forums like this. If the forum is delivering value to the industry, then the industry should be paying for it by way of levy. They're the ones obviously who have asked for it in the first instance. No problems with regional council participating in it, but I don't believe we should be responsible for funding participants in a forum which is an industry-led discussion group. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to add, sorry, Tracy's probably going to say this anyway. I guess in order to get it up off the ground and get that buy-in, the intention was that Waikato Regional Council would fund an initial term of 2 years for that independent chair, at which stage the industry would then take over funding of that. So that's the arrangement that has worked in the Bay of Plenty. Their chair is now funded by industry. So we're looking to replicate that model, which has been successful here. So just to add that in.
Yeah, thank you, David. That answers that question. Yeah, taken on board. So if there are no other questions, nothing else online. So we have a motion in front of us that the report be received, that Stratton Poll adopts the Waikato Regional Action. You're happy? Yep, we can all read it. So moved Councillor Hughes, seconded Councillor Dunbar-Smith. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? So carried. So the next, thank you guys. So the next one on our agenda is on page 103, and that's the draft Waikato Regional Energy Inventory. I believe we have Katarina.
So councillors, we've got Katrina and Blair who will present. We had our workshop on this last week. This is the formal endorsement of the inventory, and it is an inventory. I know some of the matters that were discussed at the workshop strayed into the strategy part of it. This is really the inventory of what we have in the region, positioning ourselves well again to engage in those conversations with central government.
Thank you for straightening up the playing field with that, Rosie.
You'll get a chance.
Morena koutou. So as Tracy mentioned, the purpose of this item is to seek endorsement of the draft Waikato Regional Energy Inventory 2024. And this does follow the workshop held last Monday, the 25th of March, where we presented and briefed councillors on the draft inventory. I'll just run through a quick summary this morning, and then we'll be happy to take any questions. So to recap, the inventory is required by Chief Executive KPI for this financial year. The KPI identifies two purposes for the inventory. The first is to inform Council's input to a national energy strategy. This is being prepared by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and we understand the new government does intend to continue with it. The second purpose is to inform a future review of the Waikato Regional Energy Strategy. This review is required under Council's strategic direction priority of transition to a low emissions economy. Therefore, the inventory provides an evidence base for the Council to engage in an informed way with the national strategy and other central government initiatives, and for a future review and update of the regional energy strategy. Given its purpose as a foundational piece of work, preparation of the inventory was undertaken as a desktop study. We also undertook targeted engagement with key partners and stakeholders, both to inform them of the project and to gather information for the inventory, including on relevant projects and opportunities, barriers, and potential solutions they see for energy in the Waikato region. It is anticipated that further consultation and engagement will occur as part of the future strategy review. Therefore, the draft inventory identifies further stakeholders recommended for engagement in that process. Oh, if we could just move the slide along, sorry. Ultimately, the inventory is a stocktake of what's happening regarding energy in the Waikato region. The draft inventory is structured as a report, including a series of lists, tables, and maps. Next slide, please. The inventory takes a broad approach to energy in the region. As listed on the slide, the contents include background and context, descriptions of the renewable sources of energy and existing and proposed electricity generation in the region, electricity transmission and distribution, renewable fuels and energy storage opportunities, the regulatory and market context, information about the demand side of energy, noting that further work to understand demand is recommended for the regional strategy review, key messages from partner and stakeholder engagement, information gaps, and recommendations for a review of the regional energy strategy. At the councillor workshop last Monday, we provided a briefing on the draft inventory, including an overview of each of its key sections. We have made one change to the draft inventory following this workshop, which was in response to feedback from Councillor Dunbar-Smith about the limited explanation of the difference between the two maps in the biomass section. These maps show the location of Indigenous and exotic forests and the amount of above ground biomass in the region. We've now added an additional paragraph on page 26, which is page 132 of the agenda, which clarifies the difference between these two maps. In terms of next steps, once approved by the Strategy and Policy Committee, the inventory's contents will be formatted into a WRC technical report and published for general use. And we'll also produce some communications collateral to present the content in a more user-friendly way. That brings me to the end of my summary. Through you, Mr. Chair, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for the summary. Are there any questions from anybody? Thank you very much. So comprehensive agenda in front of us, and you've covered, oh, sorry, Jen.
One online, sorry. My question was when you, and thanks for the work, guys. It's a really useful piece of work as a foundation for renewing this energy strategy. Will there be a link in the comms that you're then preparing afterwards that if people out there see something there that needs updating or correcting, that like who they can contact? Will that be able to, those comms be able to be used to get us more information over time?
I think that's definitely something that we can consider and work on. It's a good suggestion.
That'd be really great, thanks.
Yeah, Tracy's noted it down, Jennifer, so
Awesome.
That'll be picked up on.
Cool. And just to note, I've picked up a couple of other things since last week. So, but they're nothing major, I don't think, but I'll send them through so they can be considered in the future. It's just things like solar power output was there, but not so much mention about battery storage that's around linked to that, or potential EV over time storage from households. Or things around volumes in regards to the biogas category. And in hydrogen, I noticed we talk about how much water it might take to make hydrogen, but we're silent kind of on how much electricity it would take. And then anything on what upgrading would be required on gas pipelines, should that ever be wanted to be used for things like hydrogen, for example. But those are all just bits and pieces that can come in later, I think so. But I'll send them through via email. Just wanted to give you the heads up.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. So we have a motion in front of us and we have a mover by Councillor Downard, second by Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Thank you.
Guys. So next up on page 263 is our response to the government announcement on the SNAs and the requirement of them to be suspended.
So councillors, a couple of councillors had sent emails to the Chief Executive just asking for clarification of what this means. So what does it mean for our business? So Judy had prepared an email that we were going to send. However, Lizette and Judy, in talking with them, I thought it was good that all councillors were aware of the key issues and what it actually means for our business. So that's why this matter has progressed onto Strategy and Policy Committee. Should there be other announcements come out from the government, we will also update the committee if it coincides with a committee round. You'll see it here. If it doesn't, we will send an email out so that you're aware of what it means for our business, because an announcement, as Judy has identified in the paper, an announcement by press release doesn't actually confer any ability on this council to change the way it's doing business, because we still have laws that we're operating under to do that business, and that's a matter that I just think we need to be cognizant of and clear up. So I'll pass it over to Judy to work through this paper for you.
Yes, you're away. Just bring it nice and close, Judy, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and councillors. So just as Tracy had indicated, it's just an overview of the government's recent announcement and implications for councils around suspension of the SNA provisions. So just as a bit of background, all councils have had to protect areas with significant Indigenous biodiversity since the RMA came in 1991. So the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, which came into force in August last year, requires councils to map these areas and include them in their plans by August 2028, including on private land such as farmland and Māori land. So up until the NPSIB came into effect, it wasn't very clear how councils should identify these areas. And the NPSIB contains criteria and methods that provide that clarity and consistency for this process across New Zealand. So the government's agreed to suspend the requirement for councils to comply with the SNA provisions of the NPSIB for 3 years while it works on replacing the resource management legislation. In an announcement yesterday as part of the government's priority list for the next 3 months, it looks like this legislation will be introduced by 30th of June to give effect to this suspension. So it is quite soon. Sorry, can we move the slide along? That was that slide. We can move the slide along again. That's great. Thank you. There have been no changes to the NPSIB yet, so councils are not legally required to stop any work that is being progressed under the NPSIB. Council's existing obligations under the RMA to recognise and provide for areas of significant Indigenous vegetation and significant habitats of Indigenous fauna, that's section 6C, remain in place. Processes initiated before the NPSIB came into force, including existing SNAs and biodiversity protection rules already in operative or notified plans and policy statements, also remain. Other NPSIB clauses, so there are others in there such as preparing regional biodiversity strategies, policies around Indigenous vegetation cover, highly mobile fauna and monitoring and so forth. They will also remain unchanged, and the expectation is that these are still implemented. So beyond this, we understand that a broader review on the operation of SNAs will be undertaken in the next 18 to 24 months. However, the scope is currently unknown, so there is the potential that this could include other aspects of the NPSIB, not just SNAs. So staff from our council and other regional councils have provided feedback to the Ministry for the environment around issues such as the uncertainty around the current and proposed district plan changes or reviews that involve SNA mapping and scheduling, and also concerns that we have around community expectations and uncertainty. And as mentioned before, we've just heard that a law change is expected in the next few months. So thank you, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. It's my understanding that there's a directive been issued already from Wellington to stop work on SNAs. If I'm wrong, please tell me I'm wrong, and I just want to know what we require for WRC to stop work on this at the present time. We know there's law change coming up. We know the RMA is going to be repealed and it's going to be replaced, hopefully, be repealed before the end of this year. So how much are we spending on this at the moment, knowing that it's not going to happen, it's not going to be required?
In anticipation of the question of how much we're spending, I asked the staff, in terms of our ongoing program through our science team and SNA identification, because we have had 30 years to comply with the law to date, we spend on average about 27K per annum on the identification of SNAs through Lizette's team. And now I know Lizette is in the room. She's just sitting behind a chair, so I can't see her. We do, in accordance with our statutory responsibilities under the RMA and our regional policy statement, we do lodge appeals to district plans on SNAs. That is on average, I would say, over the last 3 years, between 15 and 25,000. So all up per annum, we are probably spending around 55,000 on SNAs. Now that's an average. The majority, as we've got in the appendix to the report, we have worked with the majority of councils and provided them the preliminary information that we have been required to do. So from us and our responsibility, we are in effectively a maintenance phase of our SNA database. So that's what we're spending. Whilst there is a media release and the government has said this is what we're going to do, it is not a directive to stop. And I think we need to be very clear with that. Until we have a changed piece of legislation that will change the way we do things. Now, going back to the conversation we had around the MPSFM, we're not going to continue to throw money at something that we know will likely change. It's not a significant amount of money. And as Judy has said, over the next 18 months, we know there will likely be change coming for the MPS Indigenous biodiversity. What the executive have asked is those people who are charged with the biodiversity and biosecurity business case for the LTP to have their antennae up and to look at that business case to say, has anything changed? Will that look different? That's probably the best we can do at this stage. We are not going to embark on any significant investments in areas that we know may be up for wholesale change. We just wouldn't do that. That's not smart. But we still have ongoing statutory responsibilities that we must meet. It's a tricky space.
If I may respond, thank you for that. I knew you'd be forearmed, Tracy. To me, any money is important. Money is money. It's hard earned from our ratepayers that we're spending, and I think we need to respect that fact, and where we can minimise it, then we should do so. So I'm still asking, what do you require from who to stop all work on the SNAs?
So what we would require is a change in legislation from the government and a change in our own regional policy statement.
We know that's coming down the pipeline. We've already been told that. So what do you need now? A directive from the minister responsible, or what's going to stop it?
As I said, it's a change in legislation, and we would need to change our own regional policy statement. If we were to stop work related to the MPS, related to biodiversity, related to anything else, we would likely be subject to some other regional councils to a judicial review. I wouldn't be recommending putting this council in that space.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kneebone, online.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Tracy, the bit I'm struggling with is noting, and it's all in that report, you know, Waipa District Council, where I live, went through this process. God, it feels like nearly a decade ago when they come out here to my farm to ground truth a few sites. And it appears to have been a relatively straightforward process with a Waipa and a bunch of other councils, not so much in Coromandel on a few spots for obvious reasons, but and that's no criticism of you, Warren, with a smile on my face. Lots of interesting people up there, but the bit I'm struggling with, Tracy, is what's the difference in what and might help with Chris's question right now in terms of what councils have already done versus what the government think they're putting the brakes on. And it feels to me like it's some of those situations where individual councils around the country have run into, you know, clashes with landowners for reasons that we understand. Would that be a fair call?
My reading of it through the chair is that there have been some councils who have waited to fulfil their statutory responsibilities under the RMA. As Judy said, these requirements have been in since 1991. Having worked at a district council in 1996 and undertaken this work, and the neighbouring council doing the same, it really come down to how you communicate and how you work with your landowners to deliver the outcomes. Depending on what you did was very much deterrent, or people embraced what you put out there. At the moment, Councillor Nebo, and I think there are a handful of councils, and it is a handful throughout the country, who haven't mapped, who haven't included these in their district plan. It has created, as it does every time you go through, some consternation. And this is what the government is saying, hey, let's just stop, let's just check, let's see if there's a smart way of doing it for those who haven't fulfilled that statutory responsibility. And then over the next 18 months, for those that have they done what is the right thing to do? So I do think it is really for those who have taken the time for many reasons. Generally, it's a discretionary matter that is down the priorities from fixing water and wastewater for many of our district councils. And it's a government's way of saying, let's see if we really want you to do that. Yeah.
Now that sort of makes sense, because I mean, you read the Farmers Weekly, and there clearly are some real tensions in different parts of the country. But I've got to say, in my 13 or 14 years around the table, I've never ever had one single inquiry about SNAs, and I know I can count on one hand the number of times it's come up at our council. I think it was Waiho somewhere. We had a couple, but yeah, okay. No, thank you.
Thank you, Stu. Noel online.
Can you hear me? It seems. Can you hear me?
Yep, good as gold.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello.
If you watch the video, my mouth's moving.
Okay, I'll carry on as if you can hear me. I have some sympathy from where Chris Hughes is coming from, and would be happy to move that the report be received, and further that council directs the chief executive to suspend actions in the SNA area until such time as the government announces its new direction. Thank you. Did you hear me?
Yep. Yes, we heard that clearly.
Thank you. So moved.
Would you like to comment on that proposed
Yeah.
amendment to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Personally, my advice to council would not be to pass that motion. I believe it would be putting this council in a position of exposure to judicial review from not complying with present legislation. I appreciate the frustrations and concerns expressed by members, but this would ask your chief executive to break the law, and I don't think that's wise.
Thank you, Tracy. Can I, just before I go to other questions, are we still mapping SNAs? Do we still have staff on the ground doing that, and a rough idea of how much is left?
We don't. The work that we do is at best a desktop analysis, and that is our requirement, where we provide the preliminary information to our territorial authorities. That is our responsibility. The territorial authorities then make the decision what to do with that information. Some have chosen to ground truth that. Some have chosen to use it as a amber red flag on a property if a proposal comes in. It is the territorial authority's responsibility to map and identify those SNAs and identify them on their district plans, not ours.
Thank you.
Warren, can I just respond, please?
Yes.
Look, I understand what Tracy's saying, but the word suspension has been carefully used by me, not to say that we stop, that we suspend. It does not say that we are breaking the law, and I do not believe it would be subject to judicial review. I think, without the greatest respect, Tracy, there's some extreme risk averseness here. And I know councils must comply with the law, but if we suspend, we are not stopping. It's a play on words, technical or otherwise, but I'll stand my ground on that. Thank you.
Okay, no, we don't have what you worded out on the screen, so can I just get you to repeat it slowly so Leah can type it up so we can all see what you've moved and what Councillor Hughes has seconded.
All right, hopefully you can hear me, so I will, so that.
I just want to make sure the clarity
as per item 1 there, and further that, yeah, sorry, the connection seems to be going wonky. It might be at lunchtime. And further, council directs the chief executive to suspend work on significant natural areas until such time as the government announces its new direction in that area. Hopefully you got that.
Yep, we did. Thank you. And we've just got Democracy Dave up here for a little bit of a chat.
I don't think it's ultra vires quite personally.
I'm going to make one suggestion, and that is that the motion here on screen be taken in 2 parts. The first part of the motion can be made under the delegation of the Strategy and Policy Committee, and that the second part of the motion needs to be a recommendation to council, as it could well be outside of the terms of reference for this committee to make that call in this forum, and does need council to provide some oversight there.
I can live with that, Mr. Chair.
Get a microphone back. Oh, you got it. So firstly, I've got a speaking order here of Ben first, then Angela, then we have Stu, and then we have Pamela. So Benjamin.
A couple of things. So firstly, that second recommendation shouldn't be until such time as the government announces its new direction, because it's already announced its direction. It should be until it introduces legislation to determine its new direction. I note here that Otrahonga and TCDC are the 2 that haven't mapped SNAs, but I wanted to ask a question about Waikato District. It seems that Waikato Regional Council is currently appealing Waikato District. We are requesting the mapping of SNAs. So could somebody explain what's happening there?
If I might just pass on to Alejandro, because he's been more involved in that than I have. So.
Just checking that those online can hear me. I haven't used one of the side microphones before. Just for the interest of keeping some of the information within the public excluded agenda. So one of the public excluded agenda items actually talks to the appeals that we currently have. And I can provide more information in regard to your question, Councillor Benjamin Smith, if you want. But in essence, we did appeal the decision of Waikato District Council not to map and schedule the SNAs. Our legs for that appeal are on the regional policy statement alone. As part of the discussions on where we were engaged in direct negotiations with Waikato District Council, the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity became operative, which then lent additional strength to our argument. Now, with the changes that the government is proposing, there's been a few discussions that we had with Waikato District directly engaging before mediation, and we expect that mediation, court-assisted mediation for that particular topic might occur at the end of April or early May.
Angela.
Thank you. Tracy, you touched on the risks associated with this, the word, what's on the screen, resolution. Is there anything that you missed there? Could you just reiterate the risks associated with this approach, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't want to be a happy. I don't need to reiterate. I think the council understand my point of view. It is challenging for us to carry on complying with our own rules and the rules of central government, whilst at the same time not complying to the nth degree, because we know that it's kind of slow setting concrete. So yeah, I just think we need to be very careful when we know that there are regional councils who are being challenged by some sectors of the community where they have decided to halt in advance of legislation being changed. I appreciate what Councillor Smith has said in terms of the words. There are people much smarter than me that will know the difference between stop and suspend and might argue it. But look, I really appreciate both sides of the discussion. But yeah, I've made my point clear, I think.
Councillor Kneebone online.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, good as gold.
Yeah, hey, just in response to this motion, I notice, have you got a seconder yet, by the way?
Yes, so we had a
Right.
mover and Councillor Smith and a seconder and Councillor Hughes.
Okay, so my question to both the mover and the seconder, in particular to you, Noel, I've got three questions if you want me to consider this. First one is, what work has WRC been doing to date and what are we currently doing in this space? And I'm not asking Tracy, I'm asking you, because you're the one that's telling us to stop work. So I want you to tell us what we've been doing and what we're planning to do. What is it from that answer that you don't like? And what is it from that answer that the government doesn't like? And I reinforce, I'm asking you this question through you, Mr. Chair, please, Noel. Otherwise, the only way I can accept this is it's a political stunt, hey? With all due respect. And I'd like you to put that question to the mover, please, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, did you copy that, Noel?
Yeah, I did hear the question, Mr. Chair. The reality is I don't think I need to answer that, and that's not being arrogant. I think, greatest respects to you're trying to play politics and saying that it's political. We are in a political environment, and you're kidding yourself if you don't think we are. So the reality is what I've said is quite clear, and I don't need to go into the background of what I know what's going on in relation to some councils. I don't know in relation to all.
No, my question is, what is it that this council's doing? What is it that this council's doing that you think we should stop? And I'm asking you because you're asking us to direct staff to suspend work. I'm asking you what work is it that we're doing? And don't worry, I'm well aware we're in a political environment, but that's quite a strong directive you're asking us to endorse. And I want to know what it means from you because you're the one proposing the motion.
Well, if I can shed some clarity on it. Sorry, where you go, Noel?
Sorry, my connection's going in and out, so I'm hoping you can hear. The reality is the motion is quite clear that we suspend work. So the reality is it's not important as to what work is being done or may be done. The reality is it's not to spend more money waiting for the from the government. Tracy said there might be $50,000. Well, that means that there's very little work going on at all if the charge out rates as I know them to be. So the reality is there's not much going on. Hopefully most councils are waiting SNA information from regional council. So the reality is there's probably not a lot going on but the reality is it's a matter of suspending until such time as we understand where the government's new legislation is going.
Mr.
Finish
Chair,
there.
I missed a fair chunk of that, but just look, my position is until the mover can give me some clarity on what it is he wants staff to stop doing, I'm not prepared to support it. Because it feels to me that lumping us in with other councils that perhaps aren't doing things correctly is not our issue, eh? And we've, as Tracy said, we've got an RPS that's been in place for quite some time, and I think we've got an obligation to follow it. Thank you.
Okay, I want to move this on. We've got another couple of comments from Councillor Story, and then I'll come to Councillor Dunbar Smith.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am not prepared to support this particular motion. Happy to support the first receiving of the report, but not happy to support this, particularly given that this instruction would be instructing the chief executive to not only operate contrary to legislation, but contrary to our own regional policy statement. I don't think that that's a good position for this council to give effect to. Just also, I suppose a point of clarification, the vast majority of our TA partners have already mapped these. The only ones that have not are Otorohanga and Thames Coromandel. If this motion was to pass, and it is a recommendation to council, so it still has to go through full council, but if it was to pass in that area, if, let's say, Otorohanga said, okay, we've decided to map these, WRC, we would like you to provide the information that you have committed to providing under your RPS and in accordance with the legislation, would we have a right to say no to that request? Should this motion pass?
So as I understand, we've provided all the information to the territorial authorities. So Thames Coromandel and Otorohanga have that preliminary information.
So there's no additional real.
So there is additional work in working with those councils who have the information to say, okay, generally our staff provide cheaper ecological advice than if those councils were to go and source it from an ecologist and say, hey, what do we need to do with this? Would we have an ability to say no? We would be contravening the RMA Act ourselves by not enforcing our own documents. So it would put us in a tricky position, and we'd have to get advice for our chief executive, and he would act on that.
Right, and I'm just thinking about the reputational damage of an organization not giving effect to its own policies and documents that it already has in place. I will not be supporting that.
Ben.
I'm just coming back to the fact that we seem to be prosecuting councils for not mapping SNAs.
Can I just clarify that, because through you, Mr. Chair, we are having conversations with councils to uphold our own regional policy statement, of which they helped us frame and spent an inordinate amount of time with us over a number of years saying, what is your responsibility? What is our responsibility? So we are not prosecuting them. What we are doing is enforcing our own regional policy statement that we're required to do by law. Prosecutions for SNAs will be through district councils taking those prosecutions against private landowners if they are not complying with the provisions of their district plans that give effect to Section 6E of the RMA. So we just need to be really careful with the words we're using, Councillor.
But we are appealing to a higher court with them on issues, and presumably we'll do that with Otorohanga and TCDC as well. So I just wonder if there's a legislative change is coming in June, will we still be going around appealing councils who have not done SNAs?
So if I can clarify, the legislative change is coming for those councils who haven't identified. We will still be going through the process with existing appeals for those existing councils that have identified under current law. So there will be no change there. We will be continuing with those appeals and having those conversations. Alejandro gave a really good explanation of, hey, if the law changes, then we do need to have a regroup.
Thank you.
Okay. Noel, did you have a final comment before I sum up and move this on?
Yes, ma'am.
We can't hear you at all. Walk further up the paddock.
Don't know whether you heard me, but
Not a word.
I said I'm prepared. The second part of the motion, I wanted to test the room. It's quite clear where the room's thinking. So let's move on.
We can't get any of that, Noel. It's really broken up.
I'll withdraw paragraph 2.
Okay, he was summing up my understanding. I didn't hear anything different about what we have in front of us now. So we're going to run with that. So you have a recommendation to the council that the chief executive is directed to suspend work on SNA until such time as government institute new legislation in this area. So it's a recommendation that will go to council. We have a mover in Councillor Smith.
Oh,
I'm wondering if we could hear from the seconder instead of Noel, if we can't hear Noel.
Well, can I withdraw the second part of the motion if you can hear me? Sorry, were you just spreading your comments?
Okay, we did that. So you're removing that as the mover.
It's not. We're distracted on this thing.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to run with that, Noel, unfortunately. So, and the second is happy to remove it.
Right.
So we are now sitting with the original one that the report be received. We remove the mover and the seconder. We'll start again. So do I have a mover and a seconder for as that stands? Thank you, Councillor Strange. Thank you, Councillor Story. All those in favour? Opposed?
Right.
So carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, sure.
Councillors, this is the next item is on page 268, our regional adaptation summary. Now, we're not intending to bring an update to every meeting. You did have one at the last meeting. We were going to do them every second meeting. However, this is an opportunity for those councillors who have had expressed some concern a couple of weeks ago just around getting a process in place so that our expectations with our territorial authorities are very clear and that councillors are well briefed going into many of the working parties that you're being asked to attend. We had some hiccups and I don't think councillors felt as supported as they could be. I understand we've ironed out some of those hiccups and I've seen a whole lot of briefings pop up in calendars, but it was really an opportunity for those councillors who are on the working groups to share with other councillors some of your discussions that you're bumping into and what information you need from staff prior to those meetings if you're feeling that there are still some matters that you'd like to raise. So that's why we brought it along today, and Alejandro will give you a quick overview of where each of those matters is at.
Yeah, thank you for that outline, Tracy, and I think it's important that you councillors take out of what Tracy's just said that sort of action. I do have a comment around that, and I'll come to it. But please take the report as read, Alejandro, and a brief outline would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just three very brief things to mention. So it's just, you can see in paragraph 5, this is the third report, as Tracy mentioned, and it's meant to be a report given with not as much priority OCT as it's been given so far, but there's been a few developments. In paragraph 3, you can very easily see the councils, district councils that we have plans with, but I'll refer you to paragraphs 12 and 13. So that's pages 269 and 270 of your report. That provides a status of each of the plans. It identifies the councillors that have been appointed and an update. So the third thing that I wanted to bring forward is just a few verbal updates since the report was drafted. In terms of Thames Coromandel District Council, there is a marae visit scheduled for 9 of April. So that's next week in Matai Whetu Marae in Thames. For Whakatupu Coast 2120, there was a joint working party meeting on the 19th of March. So you can see the report is dated just the day before. And there was a discussion of 3 options. The joint working party decided to recommend that staff investigate any actions that can be progressed within existing budget. So this is within the confines of council principles and what council decided when it endorsed and received the community plan for Whakatupu Coast. And lastly, for the Waikato District Plan, there was a meeting to introduce a project to appointed governance representatives with the attendance of Councillor Smith and Mahuta. Now, with those out of the way, happy to take questions through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Yeah, so just for councillors' reference, that with the Whakatupu Coast, what we did suggest was a briefing going forward, and that did happen before our last meeting. So that was just a briefing with the required councillors and staff, so just that we could question anything that was set in that agenda, recognising the fact that other councils do have elements in that agenda, so you're obviously not always aware of what's going on, etc. And then the technical working groups may have a lot more information behind that. So very productive session, and that's now in our calendars going forward for the two with Hauraki District and also TCDC. So thank you very much for that, and I'm happy to take any other questions.
Just wanted to say it worked well. You resolved the issues, so we're united when we go into a meeting.
Yep. So with no other questions, I will move that the.
Can I, sorry.
Oh, sorry,
one more
didn't see you.
Just wondering, I appreciate the update on these. Have we got any view of where this continues to go? I'm just thinking about our resources. I'm thinking about the availability of councillors to continue to populate these types of community or of these types of partnership approaches going forward. Any comment on resourcing?
That is a question that is looming large in our minds, particularly, I think, going back to those principles in paragraph 10. We are very much waiting the outcomes of the regional climate risk assessment work, because at the moment we are responding to requests from our territorial authorities. Once we have that regional risk assessment work, it might say, well, actually, the entirety, the priority should maybe be Taupo, South Waikato, and just because that territorial authority hasn't got around to doing the work, it's something that we're very mindful of, that at the moment it is a first in, first serve basis. However, we are having ongoing conversations internally around where our priorities should lie. We will need to link very closely with our regional resilience team. Similarly, there's a tension between, and somebody once said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So, you know, we need to sit around the table to hear those conversations. But I'm very aware of, at the moment, it is a particular, you know, Waikato, Hauraki, Thames, Coromandel. If any more come up, it is a significant strain on those constituent councillors. Yeah. That's a conversation that Alejandro's been having with the council based on our previous discussion around this table, when you want our councillors to attend, and it was a matter that Councillor Dunbar-Smith raised, over what period, for how long, what does that look like? Because I think that's really important. We're only going to see more and more of these. And we need to frame up why we're at that table and how much time we can give them, because it may determine our participation.
And I suppose there would be some overlap in this regional adaptation planning and our regional spatial planning development. I just think that that's really key to ensure that that connectivity is assured going forward in the planning process. Yeah.
Thank you, Pam. No, very relevant questions, and it is something that we've dealt with through these working groups that we sit on, and just identifying what sort of areas are business as usual, and then where possible further investment may come, and any type of process, and just making it really clear with those communities that there are costs going forward. So thanks for that. So we have a mover in the report being received as myself. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Dunbar-Smith. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Thank you, Alejandro. Yep. We now have Miffy. We are on page 276 of your agenda, and it is the submission summary report for April 2024.
Kia ora tātou. Given that you've had a very full agenda and there's not much to update, I will just say that we know that there is a lot more coming, so we will keep you updated. There will be more submissions and probably more submission subcommittees, but I will open it up for any questions on the ones that we have in the report today.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just directing councillors to that ever useful page of, what have we got, page 278. So the one pager, so you can see what's going on in your constituency if you get asked.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's a great diagram and leads into those next pages really well. So if there are no other questions for the report, if I could have a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Thank you, Councillor Hodge. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? So carried. Thank you, Miffy. We now look to move into public excluded for the reasons on your screen, and I will move. And second, Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Just have a minute while we make sure everything's off. Everyone's out of the room that should be.